My name is Clara, and this is the story of how I was sentenced to death by the Saudi royal family, and how Jesus Christ appeared to me in my darkest hour. I was born into privilege. My father was a distant cousin to the Saudi royal family, wealthy beyond measure, connected to power that most people could never imagine. I grew up in palaces with marble floors, surrounded by servants, draped in the finest silks. But all that wealth, all that power, meant nothing when I couldn't give my husband the one thing he wanted most: an heir. I was married at 19 to Prince Khalid, a man 20 years older than me, chosen by my family to secure our position within the royal circle. The wedding was magnificent. Thousands of guests, gold everywhere, celebrations that lasted for days. I thought I was living a fairy tale. But fairy tales, I learned, can become nightmares. The first year of marriage, I was hopeful. Khalid was kind to me, patient. We both believed children would come naturally. But as months turned into years, and my body refused to conceive, everything changed. The kindness in his eyes turned to disappointment. The patience became frustration. And then, anger. In Saudi royal culture, a woman's worth is measured by her ability to produce heirs, especially sons. I underwent every medical treatment available. Doctors from Europe, America, the best specialists money could buy. They found nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with Khalid. But still, no child came. By the third year, Khalid's family began to pressure him. His mother would look at me with contempt, whispering to others when I passed. His brothers made jokes about his virility, suggesting he needed a real woman. The other wives in the family, those who had sons, treated me like I was cursed, like my barrenness might be contagious. I threw myself into prayer. I prayed 5 times a day, sometimes more. I made pilgrimages, gave to charity, read the Quran until my eyes burned. I begged Allah to bless me with a child. But heaven seemed silent. The years passed. 4 years, 5 years, 6 years of emptiness. Khalid took a second wife. Her name was Amira, and she was just 17. Beautiful, young, fertile. I remember the day he told me. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eyes. He just said it was necessary, that he needed an heir, that it wasn't personal. But how could it not be personal? I was being replaced because my body had failed. The humiliation was unbearable. In our culture, I had to live in the same household as Amira. I had to watch her youth, her beauty, knowing that she would give Khalid what I could not. I felt like I was dying inside, piece by piece, day by day. And then, Amira became pregnant. The announcement was made with great celebration. Khalid's family rejoiced. There were parties, gifts, preparations for the heir. And me? I was forgotten. I became invisible in my own home, a ghost haunting the corridors of the palace. I fell into a deep depression. I stopped eating. I stopped caring for myself. Some nights, I would stand on the balcony of my room, looking down at the marble courtyard below, wondering if it would be easier to just jump, to end the shame, the pain, the loneliness. But I was too afraid. Too afraid of death, too afraid of what might come after. So I continued to exist, not really living, just breathing, just surviving. When Amira gave birth, it was a son, a healthy, beautiful boy. The celebrations lasted for weeks. Khalid named him Abdullah, and he was everything to the family. The heir they had been waiting for, and my irrelevance became complete. I thought that would be the end of it, that I would live out my days in obscurity, forgotten in some corner of the palace. But I was wrong, because Khalid's family, they wanted me gone completely. They saw me as a stain on the family honor, a reminder of failure. And in royal circles, such stains must be erased. It was Khalid's mother who orchestrated it. She was a powerful woman, connected to the highest levels of the family. She convinced Khalid that I was a curse, that my continued presence would bring bad luck to his new son. She whispered in ears, made arrangements, pulled strings. And one day, Khalid came to me with news that shattered what was left of my world. I was to be accused of adultery. A false accusation, of course, but in Saudi law, such accusations don't require much proof when the right people are involved. They had found a man, a servant in the palace, who they claimed I had been having an affair with. He was paid to confess, or perhaps tortured, I never knew. But his confession was enough. The punishment for adultery in Saudi Arabia, especially for someone associated with the royal family, is death. Death by execution. I was arrested, taken from the palace in the middle of the night, thrown into a cell. No trial, no chance to defend myself. The sentence had already been decided. I spent weeks in that cell. It was small, dark, suffocating. The walls were stained. The floor was cold concrete. I had gone from silk sheets and marble floors to this. From a princess to a condemned criminal, and all because I couldn't have children. In those weeks I experienced a darkness I cannot fully describe. It wasn't just the physical darkness of the cell, but a spiritual darkness that pressed down on me like a weight. I felt abandoned by God, by my family, by everyone I had ever known. I felt like my life had been utterly meaningless, a waste, a failure from beginning to end. I stopped praying to Allah. What was the point? He had never answered my prayers before. He had never given me a child. He had never protected me from this injustice. I felt betrayed by the faith I had followed all my life. The guards told me I would be executed within the month. They said it would be quick, that I shouldn't be afraid. But I was terrified. Not just of death, but of dying with such shame, such dishonor. Of being remembered, if I was remembered at all, as an adulteress, a disgrace. One night, about 2 weeks before my scheduled execution, I was lying on the floor of my cell, curled up, crying. I had no tears left, really, just dry sobs that racked my body. I was at the absolute bottom of despair. I wanted to die, and yet I was terrified of dying. I was trapped in a hell of hopelessness. And then, something happened that changed everything. The cell, which had been dark, suddenly filled with light. Not harsh light, not like someone had turned on a lamp, but soft, warm, golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the most beautiful light I had ever seen. I sat up, confused, frightened. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, that my mind had finally broken under the stress. But the light was real. I could feel its warmth on my skin. And then, in the light, I saw a figure. A man, dressed in simple white robes, with the kindest eyes I had ever seen. He was standing in my cell, just a few feet away from me, looking at me with such love, such compassion, that I began to cry all over again. I didn't know who he was at first. He didn't look like anyone I had ever seen. His presence was overwhelming, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made me feel completely known, completely seen, like he could look into every corner of my soul and still love what he saw there. He spoke to me. His voice was gentle, but it filled the entire cell, filled my entire being. He said, "Clara, my daughter, do not be afraid. I am with you." I asked him who he was, and he smiled, and he said, "I am Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God, and I have come to you because I love you." Jesus. I had heard of Jesus, of course. In Islam, he is a prophet, a holy man, but not the Son of God. We were taught that Christians had corrupted his message, that he was just a man. But in that moment, Looking at him, feeling his presence, I knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly who he said he was. He was divine. He was God himself, standing in my cell. I fell to my knees. I didn't know what else to do. I was in the presence of the divine, and I was overwhelmed. I said, "Lord, I am not worthy. I am a failure. I am nothing." And he knelt down beside me. He reached out and lifted my face so I was looking into his eyes, and he said, "Clara, you are not a failure. You are precious to me. You are my beloved daughter, and I have never left you, not for a single moment. Even when you thought you were alone, I was there. I heard every prayer. I saw every tear. I felt every pain." I said, "But why? Why did you let this happen to me? Why did you let me suffer so much?" And Jesus said, "I did not cause your suffering. The cruelty of man, the darkness of this world, these things are not my will. But I can use even the darkest circumstances to bring about light. Your suffering has not been meaningless. It has brought you to this moment, where you can truly see me, truly know me." He told me that he had been preparing me for something far greater than I could imagine, that my inability to have children was not a curse, but part of a plan that I couldn't yet see. He told me that he had a purpose for my life, that my story was not over, that in fact, it was just beginning. I asked him, "But Lord, I am going to die. They are going to execute me in 2 weeks. How can my story continue?" And Jesus smiled, and he said, "Clara, do you trust me?" It was such a simple question, but it contained everything. Did I trust him? Could I trust him? I had trusted Allah all my life, and look where it had gotten me. But looking into Jesus' eyes, I felt something I had never felt before. Peace. Complete, total peace. And I knew, in that moment, that I could trust him with everything. I said, "Yes, Lord, I trust you." And Jesus said, "Then believe. Believe that I am the resurrection and the life. Believe that even death has no power over those who belong to me. Believe, and you will see the glory of God." He reached out and placed his hand on my head, and immediately I felt something flow through me. It was like electricity, but warm, like liquid light filling every part of my body. I felt strength returning to my limbs, hope returning to my heart. The darkness that had been pressing down on me for so long lifted, and I could breathe again. Jesus said, "I am going to set you free, Clara. Not just from this prison, but from every prison that has ever held you. The prison of shame, the prison of unworthiness, the prison of fear. You are going to walk out of this place, and you are going to tell the world what I have done for you. You are going to be my witness, my testimony of grace and redemption." I said, "But how, Lord? How is that possible?" And he said, "With man, it is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Watch and see what I will do." Then the light began to fade. Jesus was still there, but the brightness was diminishing. He said, "I will never leave you, Clara. Even when you cannot see me, I am with you. Remember this night. Remember that you are loved beyond measure. And do not be afraid of what is to come." And then he was gone. The cell was dark again, but I was not the same. I was changed, completely and utterly changed. The hopelessness was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a certainty, a knowing, that God had a plan, and that everything was going to be all right. I didn't tell the guards about what had happened. How could I? They would think I was insane. But I held on to it. This experience, this encounter with Jesus, like a treasure in my heart. And I waited to see what he would do. 3 days later, something extraordinary happened. There was an inspection at the prison, some kind of international human rights delegation that had been granted access. It was unusual, almost unprecedented. But they came, these foreigners, with their cameras and their notebooks, asking questions. One of them, a woman from Britain, somehow ended up speaking with me. I don't know how she got access to my cell, but she did. And when she asked me why I was imprisoned, I told her the truth. I told her about the false accusation, about being condemned without a trial, about being sentenced to death for a crime I didn't commit. She was horrified. She took notes. She took pictures. She promised she would do something. I didn't really believe her. I had been disappointed too many times, but I thanked her anyway. But that woman, she kept her word. She went back to Britain and she wrote an article about me. It was published in a major newspaper. And then another journalist picked it up. And then another. Within a week, my story was international news. A Saudi royal woman, falsely accused and sentenced to death for not having children. The pressure on the Saudi royal family was immense. Human rights organizations were calling for my release. Governments were making statements. The family's reputation was being damaged. And in royal circles, reputation is everything. I still don't know all the details of what happened behind the scenes, all the negotiations, the deals that were made. But 10 days after Jesus appeared to me, I was released. Not pardoned exactly, but the charges were quietly dropped. I was told to leave Saudi Arabia immediately and never return. I was put on a plane to London with nothing but the clothes on my back. No money, no possessions, no family, but I was free. And Jesus had kept his promise. In London, I sought asylum. The British government granted it, given the publicity around my case. I was given a small apartment, some financial assistance, help with learning English, and I began to rebuild my life. But more than that, I began to seek Jesus. I had to know more about him, about this God who had saved me. I found a church, a small congregation of believers who welcomed me with open arms. They didn't care about my past, my failures, my shame. They just loved me, the way Jesus had loved me in that cell. I began to read the Bible, the New Testament especially. And with every page, I fell more in love with Jesus. I learned about his life, his teachings, his death and resurrection. I learned that he came to save people like me, broken people, rejected people, people who had nothing to offer but their need. I was baptized 6 months after arriving in London. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Going under the water, feeling all my old life wash away, coming up new, reborn, a child of God. I wept with joy. And then Jesus began to fulfill the second part of his promise. He had said I would be his witness, that I would tell the world about what he had done for me. And opportunities began to open up. I was invited to speak at churches, at conferences, at events. People wanted to hear my story, not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because it was a testimony of God's grace, of his power to save, to redeem, to transform. I traveled all over Europe, then to America, then to other parts of the world. Everywhere I went, I told my story. I told people about being condemned to death, about Jesus appearing to me, about being set free. And people's lives were changed. They came to know Jesus because of what he had done in my life. But the most amazing part, the part that still makes me weep when I think about it, happened 3 years after I left Saudi Arabia. I received a message through a secret channel from someone I never expected to hear from again. It was from my former husband, Khalid. He told me that he had been following my story, that he had heard about what I was saying about Jesus. He said that he couldn't stop thinking about it, that he was troubled in his spirit, and then he said something that shocked me. He said that Amira, his second wife, the one who had given him a son, had left him. She had taken their child and returned to her family. He was alone. But more than that, he said he had been having dreams. Dreams of a man in white, with kind eyes, who told him to seek the truth. He asked me if I could help him understand what was happening to him. I was stunned. This was the man who had allowed me to be falsely accused, who had turned his back on me when I needed him most. And now he was reaching out, asking about Jesus. Only God could orchestrate something like this. I began to correspond with Khalid in secret. I told him about Jesus, about what he had done for me, about what he could do for Khalid too. And slowly, gradually, Khalid's heart began to open. He began to question everything he had been taught, everything he had believed, and eventually, he gave his life to Christ. Khalid is still in Saudi Arabia. He can't be open about his faith, it's too dangerous. But he is a believer, a follower of Jesus. We communicate occasionally, and he tells me how he is secretly sharing the gospel with others, how he is using his position to help persecuted Christians in the region. God took our broken, painful story and is using it for his glory. As for me, I continue to travel, to speak, to share. I am now 43 years old. I never remarried, never had children of my own. But I have thousands of spiritual children, people who have come to know Jesus through my testimony. And I am more fulfilled, more joyful, more at peace than I ever was in the palaces of Saudi Arabia. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about what happened to me, if I'm bitter about the years of suffering, the false accusation, the death sentence. And I tell them honestly, no, because if all of that had to happen for me to encounter Jesus, for me to know him and make him known, then it was worth it. Every tear was worth it. Every moment of pain was worth it. Jesus told me in that cell that my inability to have children was not a curse. And he was right. If I had been able to have children, I would probably still be in Saudi Arabia, living a comfortable but empty life, never knowing the true God, never experiencing his love and grace. My barrenness was actually a gift, though I couldn't see it at the time. It was the gift that led me to Jesus. I think about that night in the cell often. I think about Jesus kneeling beside me, lifting my face, telling me I was beloved. That memory sustains me through every difficulty, every challenge. Because I know with absolute certainty that I am not alone, that I am loved, that I have a purpose, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate me from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. To anyone who is listening to my story, anyone who is suffering, anyone who feels like a failure, like they're not good enough, like they've been forgotten by God, I want you to know this. Jesus sees you. He knows your pain. He has not forgotten you. And he can take even the darkest, most hopeless situation and transform it into something beautiful. You may feel barren right now. Barren of hope. Barren of purpose. Barren of joy. But Jesus specializes in making the barren fruitful. He did it for me, and he can do it for you. You just have to trust him. You just have to believe. My name is Clara. I was a Saudi royal woman, condemned to death for not having children. But Jesus appeared to me, saved me, and gave me a new life, a new purpose, a new hope. And if he can do that for me, he can do it for anyone. This is my testimony. This is my story, and it is all for his glory.